Good evening, everyone, and welcome to 30 minutes of Torah study for the week that corresponds to the Torah portion of Achrei Mos and Kedoshim. On the Jewish calendar, we find ourselves in a time that is called the counting of the Omer, in Hebrew, Sfiras Omer, between the holiday of Pesach and the holiday of Shavuos. It is essentially a countdown where we count the days from Pesach to Shavuos, which is when we are going to receive the Torah. Let's look at the way that this time period is described by the Alter Rebbe in his Code of Jewish Law. The Alter Rebbe writes, "It is a biblical mitzvah for every Jew to count on a daily basis for 7 weeks, starting from when the Omer sacrifice is offered. The sages interpreted the words count for yourselves. It might be thought that it is the Jewish court who conducts this count, in the same way that the Jewish court counts the 7-year cycle and then sanctifies the 50th year as the Jubilee, a year. But count for yourself teaches us that every person must do the count. The congregation and the leaders are unable to count on behalf of the public." So the Alter Rebbe points out something quite interesting, that usually when it comes to the functioning of the calendar, that's something which the rabbinic court would establish. It's something that the rabbinic court keeps track of. Yet when it comes to counting of the Omer, it's a personal obligation on each individual to count the Omer every day and to actually make that bracha. What is the significance of the count? So the Medrash says something that's actually quite beautiful. The Medrash says, why do we count the days between Pesach and Shavuos more so than any other festival? This can be compared to a prince who was out riding and found a man who had been cast into a pit. The prince told him, "I will pull you out of this pit, and then, after some time, I will give you my daughter as a wife." The man grew tremendously happy and said to himself, "Not only will he take me out of this pit, but he also wants to give me his daughter." And the prince did just that. He took the fellow out of the pit, dressed him in fine clothes, and gave him gold and silver. When the man saw that the prince was true to his word, he began to count how long it would be until the prince would fulfill his pledge to give him his daughter. The Jews in Egypt were as if in a pit. So with this parable, we can understand the excitement and the anticipation that the Jewish people had. Not only were they free from slavery, not only did they have physical riches, but they had something even more valuable than that. They're going to enter into a deep relationship, a deep partnership with God. They're going to receive the Torah. The Torah is considered to be, at Mount Sinai, the marriage, the wedding between God and the Jewish people. So the Jews are counting down till they receive the Torah with great anticipation and with great excitement. But I have a question. The question is, why is this countdown a mitzvah? All that we're doing is marking the days between Pesach and Shavuos, but nothing happens on those days. Those days are simply the time period in between Pesach and Shavuos. There's a number of days that it takes to get from Pesach to Shavuos. There's 49 days. Okay, so we're checking them off on the calendar. But the days themselves are not holy. They're not sacred days. They're just ordinary, regular days. And all we're really doing is waiting for that time to pass. Why is it a mitzvah? Why do we make a bracha? Why is it something that's holy? All we're doing is waiting. Now, let me try to explain it in a little bit of a different way. On the calendar, we have days that we celebrate that are important to us. For example, our wedding anniversary. A wedding anniversary is a very, very special day. However, before we got married, we got engaged. And when we were engaged, we certainly were looking with excitement and anticipation for the day of our wedding. And we might even have been counting down those days from our engagement till our wedding. But do any of you, by any chance, celebrate the time period between your engagement and your wedding every year? And you have a countdown on the calendar from when you got engaged until when you got married? That doesn't make any sense. You celebrate the wedding. That's ultimately what it's all about. Yes, there was at one point in time a countdown where you counted down from the engagement to the wedding. But that wasn't, those days weren't meaningful. Those days weren't significant. You were just trying to get through them as fast as you could until you got to the next day. So why is it a mitzvah? Why do we make a bracha on the counting of the Omer, which we're just trying to get past those days till we reach the day of the giving of the Torah? Another question. Most mitzvahs that are seasonal, mitzvahs that we don't do on a continuous or regular basis, we make the bracha of shehechianu. We are acknowledging to God and giving praise and thanks to God that we have merited to reach this special occasion to be able to do this mitzvah. You eat matzah at the Seder, right? For Pesach, there's a shechianu at the beginning when we make Kiddush for Pesach. For the Sukkot, the first time you sit in the Sukkah, the first time you have the Lulav and Esrog, when you blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, all of the mitzvahs that are seasonal throughout the year, we make the blessing of shechianu. Yet, when it comes to the counting of the Omer, which absolutely is a seasonal mitzvah, we do not make a shechianu. Why should we not make a shechianu? So here we have the Levush, writes like this. Sephira, which is the counting of the Omer, is about the upcoming goal, signifying how time is passing until we reach the day the Torah will be given. Each day, we bless and praise God that another day has passed and brought us closer to receiving the Torah. Accordingly, how can we make the shechianu blessing when counting Sphira, when the desired day and primary cause of joy, Matan Torah, hasn't yet arrived? We only recite shechianu for a joyous occasion, whereas with Sphira, there is no joy. Thus, we don't recite the shechianu blessing. So the comment of the Levush makes our question even greater. We don't make a shechianu when we do the mitzvah of counting of the Omer, because nothing's happening. We're just knocking off the days until we get to the giving of the Torah. When do we make a shechianu? On Shavuos. When we get the Torah, then we make a shechianu. So how come we make a bracha to count the days of the Omer when there does not seem to be a lot of substance to the actually counting the Omer? The fact that we do make a bracha for the count of the Omer tells us, even though it's not a shechianu, like other mitzvahs, there's something that we need to learn. There's something that we need to pay attention to when it comes to this specific mitzvah, right? There's more to these days than days which we are just prepping and anticipating the real day, which is the holiday of Shavuos. To answer this question, we need to look a little bit about the concept of chinuch, of education in Jewish life. The Torah says that parents have an obligation to educate their children in Judaism and in Torah and mitzvahs. There are two parts to this commandment that parents have. Number one, a parent is obligated to educate their children. That means information, knowledge. A parent is obligated to teach their children how to live, how to behave, how to act as a Jew, so they should be knowledgeable and educated when the Torah and mitzvahs. But the information is not enough. The parent is obligated that their children should actually practice and observe Torah and mitzvahs. Even though they're not bar mitzvah yet, even though they're not bas mitzvah yet, nevertheless, from the moment that they have the ability to do them, the parent is obligated not just to teach them, but that their child should actually practice those mitzvahs. Let's look what it says in the Talmud. The sages taught, a minor who knows how to wave the lulav is obligated in the mitzvah of lulav. One who knows how to wrap himself in a garment is obligated in the mitzvah of tzitzis. If he knows to preserve the sanctity of tefillin in a state of cleanliness, his father buys him tefillin. If he knows how to speak, his father immediately teaches him Torah and Shema. What part of the Torah is taught to such a child? Rav Amnuna said, the verse Moshe commanded us Torah, an inheritance of the congregation of Jacob. And what part of the Shema is taught to such a child? The first verse of Shema. We see from this text, the moment that a child has the physical and mental ability to perform these mitzvahs, there's an obligation that the child should not just learn about them, but actually should do these mitzvahs in practice. Now, are we trying to say that children are actually obligated in mitzvahs? Of course not. That would negate the whole concept of a bar mitzvah. A bar mitzvah is the time where a kid actually becomes obligated themselves to do the mitzvahs. So who has the obligation? Not the kid, the parents. The parents have an obligation to make sure that their children know about the mitzvahs and actually observe those mitzvahs in practice, right? So the parents are training their children in order to be able to do the mitzvah. Because the child themselves is not actually obligated in the mitzvah, there is a very practical halachic issue, which is a child cannot discharge an adult's obligation to do a mitzvah. Look what it says in text number 6. It is unanimous that a minor cannot discharge another person's obligation, even if they have reached a mature age. This is a correct ruling. For a mature minor is not obligated to fulfill any mitzvahs, even by rabbinic standards. It is we who are obligated to educate the minor in mitzvah performance. Therefore, it doesn't make sense for a minor to discharge anyone else's obligation, even for a rabbinic mitzvah. For anyone who isn't obligated themselves cannot discharge someone else's obligation. Let me give you an example. On the holiday of Purim, it's a mitzvah to hear the Megillah. Can a 12-year-old boy who knows the Megillah by heart, who can read it so beautifully, so clearly, every word pronounced properly, every musical note with perfection, could that 12-year-old boy read the Megillah for an adult Jewish person and therefore fill their obligation? The answer is no. Because it's not the kid's obligation to do the mitzvah, it's the parent's obligation to train the child to do the mitzvah. That's how it works. The kid's obligated, not the parent. This might lead you to think that there's not so much value in what the kid is actually doing, because at the end of the day, the kid is just practicing, right? It's not really real. It's not an obligation on the kid, it's an obligation on the parents. But that's not so simple, because we find in another area of Jewish law that there actually is one scenario and circumstance where a 12-year-old boy, or we can have a girl who's 11, can actually fulfill the obligation for an adult, right? What's the obligation? Let's go to the Rambam. When two people eat together, each person should recite grace after meals by himself. If one knows how to recite grace and the other does not, the one who knows should recite the grace out loud, and the other person should recite Amen after each blessing. In this manner, the one who doesn't know the prayer fulfills his obligation. A son may recite grace for his father. So in this law, the Rambam tells us the principle that if you don't know how to do a prayer, someone else who has that obligation is able to recite that prayer for you. All you have to do is listen and say Amen, and it's considered that if you actually did that prayer. Normally, this would not work for a child. Child who is under bar bas mitzvah cannot recite a prayer and fulfill the obligation for an adult. However, when it comes to benching, when it comes to reciting the grace after meals, even a 12-year-old boy can recite the benching, an adult can say Amen, and they have fulfilled their obligation. This is very different than what we said before. Before we said when it comes to reading the Megillah, a kid cannot do it. However, when it comes to benching, we said a kid can do it. Why? What's the difference? The Rebbe explains that we're learning something very, very important here, which is, even though a kid, right, does not have the same obligation as an adult, therefore, in general, cannot fulfill the mitzvah obligation for an adult, nevertheless, you should never think that what the kid does has no value. Don't think that what the kid's doing is just practice, it's just training. You may remember a basketball player, Allen Iverson, played for the Philadelphia 76ers, one of the stars of the league. And he was very strongly criticized for, I think, skipping some practices. And at the press conference, he said, what are we talking about? Practice. We're talking about practice. We're not talking about I missed games or I didn't try in the games. We're talking about practice, just practice. The Rebbe says here, when it comes to what our children are doing, it's not just practice. It's not just something that is meaningless. It's not just something that's training. What our children do absolutely has value. So much value that in a certain circumstance, when it comes to benching, a child has the ability to fulfill the obligation for an adult. What can this be compared to? Might not be a perfect example, but maybe you could relate to this a little bit. You have a concept called child actors. The child who is an actor cannot negotiate their own contract. You cannot negotiate your own salary. There are laws that restrict when and how that child is able to work, how many hours a day the person can work. Very different than an adult. An adult actor has the ability to choose the contract, to work however many hours that is being demanded of them, and so on. Because an adult has a certain degree of responsibility. The child cannot make many of the choices that for themselves that an adult can make. Nevertheless, does their acting have any value? Of course, they're in the movie, right? They're in the show. So yes, they're limited in the choices and the decisions that they can make. Nevertheless, they're making a very meaningful contribution. Similarly, a child, yes, they're not bar mitzvah. They don't have the same obligations as adults. Nevertheless, what they're doing absolutely has value, and they're a part of it. This is how the Rebbe says it. Let's understand the role and part the minor plays in the mitzvah of education. He's not just an actor without whom the father wouldn't be able to fill the father's mitzvah of education. Rather, the minor is the subject of the mitzvah of education, as the mitzvah is for the minor to gain practice. So in as much as the father's mitzvah is to educate the child to perform all mitzvahs, so in as much as the father's mitzvah is to educate the child to perform all mitzvahs, a sense of responsibility automatically lands on the minor, and that renders the minor a responsible party. In other words, the father is obligated to educate his child to perform mitzvahs. Though the minor's mitzvah performance is an outgrowth of the father's obligation, it is the act of the mitzvah performed by the minor that carries out that command. As such, the minor is rendered a responsible party, so much so that the minor is able to discharge an adult's obligation in certain situations. The action of the child, of the minor, is not just merely simply practice because the father has to make sure the kid does it. Rather, what the child does has real value. It absolutely means something. And even in certain circumstances, the child can fulfill the obligation of an adult. What is it that emerges from this discussion over here? That when we're talking about practice, the attitude and the view of practice should not be, it's something that we're doing now in order to prepare for later. So it's not that right now matters, it's later that matters. We can't get to later without doing some practice now. That is not the attitude at all. The child has to feel that they are a part of that mitzvah and that they are responsible for the mitzvah. If they just feel it's practice, it's training, a child can say, you know what? It's just practice, it's not that important. That would be a mistake. That is not an authentic, correct Jewish approach to education. The child has to fully feel that they are a part of the mitzvah and that they have a responsibility towards that mitzvah. The only way to ensure, the Rebbe writes, that a Jewish child assumes their own identity and creates a personal connection with the mitzvahs is if they are properly educated about them. This is in line with our discussion here, namely that the mitzvah of education renders the minor a responsible party. If it's only the parents telling the kids what to do, then when they become bar mitzvah, it's very easy for them ultimately to reject and want nothing to do with it. Why? Because it was their parents' mitzvah. It wasn't their mitzvah. We have to make sure that the kids feel they are a part of it. It's theirs. They have ownership. It belongs to them, and they have a responsibility to the Jewish people as well. Now we can understand why counting the Omer is so important, and why we make a bracha, and why it's so significant. Even though the days themselves are not holy, even though the days themselves are not significant, we're just trying to count them down till we get to the Torah. Nevertheless, we make a bracha on each of those days because there's absolutely value on each of those days. Those days are not just preparation for the big day. but it's the time where we're meant to really develop and feel a connection and a responsibility towards Torah, that Torah is important to me, Torah is a part of my life, and therefore I can't wait till we get to the day of Shavuos when we actually receive the Torah. So each of these days are not just prep, it's not just practice, it's not just a check mark. There's something real and valuable on each of these days. I want to conclude the class with a few texts from the Rebbe, where he brings this idea and develops it a little bit further in the way that we are meant to educate our children. The first principle is just sending our kids to Hebrew school is not enough. Yes, it's important to send your kids to Hebrew school, but just the act alone of sending kids to Hebrew school, that is not going to make a kid a properly educated, a properly passionate Jew with the skills necessary for the rest of their life. The Rebbe writes, sadly, many parents worry about their children's material concerns, food, clothing, toys, and the like, whereas when it comes to other things, such as the all-important concern that their child grow up as a proper mensch, they don't pay as much attention. Whether it is because of financial concerns or other matters, they rely on the fact that the child will get everything they need from school. It is regarding such an attitude that the Torah stresses that the party primarily responsible for a child's education is his or her parents. The school is only the parent's agent in this mission. As such, even after the parents send their child off to school, the responsibility remains on the parents' shoulders. Of course, the children need schooling. However, it's not enough. The parents must do whatever they can to educate their own children. We cannot just rely on the fact that they are going to a nice school and they're going to a nice Hebrew school. They need to live it, they need to breathe it, they need to see their parents practicing it. The parents have to be the ultimate role models. The parents have to be intimately involved. That's the only way that it's going to work. And yes, it's hard work. We're not saying it's easy. It takes time, right? It takes effort, it takes money, it takes studying. In other words, yes, it's a full-time job to educate your children from a Jewish perspective. Being a parent is a full-time job. It's our number one responsibility. The same thing applies to our responsibilities as parents when it comes to educating our children. Educating our children in a Jewish way has to be just as important to us as an important business meeting. If an important business meeting has more priority than the way that we educate our children, the result is going to be clear and obvious in the way that our children grow up. Just as if you miss an important business meeting, it's going to have an effect on the business, right? There's going to be an impact, there's going to be a consequence of missing that important business meeting. In exactly the same way, there are consequences if we miss out on doing our part when it comes to educating our children as well. If we think about all the stuff that we want to give our children, that's important to us as parents to give our children, maybe that they have the latest cell phone, maybe that they have the latest tablet, maybe that they have the latest gaming system, maybe that they play in every sports league, do dance, and maybe that they go on the nicest vacations that are possible. How long does that really last? What real lifelong impact do the kids have that they had this cell phone, that gadget or not? But a real education, a proper Jewish education, an experiential education, this is literally something that lasts an entire lifetime, that has a tremendous day-to-day impact on the rest of the kid's life. The Rebbe continues, parents' primary dedication ought to be to provide their children with a robust Jewish education. Parents should be committed to raising children who are pious, God-fearing, and students of the Torah. This will bring both parties lasting joy. When parents decide to commit their energy to providing their child with nice clothing so that he or she can be the best dressed kid in the neighborhood, well, such a joy only lasts a day, a week, a month, or maybe even a year. But thereafter, when the child matures, it becomes obvious that he or she was deprived of true joy that could have lasted their entire life. Imagine a child, right, who his whole life, as an adult, your child grows up as an adult, and their whole focus is around Shabbos. Shabbos is coming. Who am I inviting as guests? Where am I going for Shabbos? What are we doing with the holidays? Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot. Could you imagine the joy that a parent's going to have when the central focus of your child's life is things that surround meaning, things that surround purpose, things that surround values? But as we spend so much time and energy and effort making sure our kids have all these other things, which is nothing wrong with the little leagues and the hockeys and the dance and the vacation and the nothing wrong with those things. But if we don't place the same emphasis and energy, think about it for a second. What's the goal? What do we want from our kids? When our kids become adults, what do we want them to have and to cherish and to value? If you have a child who can daven fluently, can walk into a shul and literally understands every word what's happening, why, when, and where, can you imagine what a gift that is that you gave to your child? You know how many adults, they walk into a shul, they don't know one word what the chazan is saying, they have no clue what's taking place in the service, and they leave. But you know what? They played Little League, right? And they were a shortstop every day from when they were 10 to they were 17 years old. Now, again, I'm not against Little League. I played Little League till I was 16, and I'm very happy that I did. Little League is great, but we have to emphasize and value both. When we recognize what do we want from our kids, what should they look like, we have to think, how much time am I investing in my kids? What am I investing in my children? What are they going to get and gain as adults from all the things that I'm showing and demonstrating and doing as children? Ultimately, it is the Jewish gifts that are priceless, and the gifts that truly are the things that are going to last a lifetime and make a real meaningful impact on that child's life, because it shapes their values, it shapes their relationships, it really guides and directs and gives them strength as they go through the ups, downs, the challenges, the struggles of life, and ensures that they're going to be part of a community that supports them and that they can support the community as well. So this is why this time period of counting the Omer, which really, it's just a practice, we're just waiting for the next thing. No. We make a bracha over it. It's important, it matters. So to children, we don't say, they're kids, it doesn't really matter, let them have fun. Yeah, kids have to have fun, but we have to recognize it matters. They got to be a part of it, they got to live it, they got to love it. And it's our job as parents, grandparents, to share that with them and to be that role model for them. Right? Any questions, comments, thoughts? So before questions, comments, and thoughts, I just want to make sure that I remind everyone, Wednesday, May 3rd, 7 p.m., we are launching this incredible new course, Supernatural, Signs, Spirits, and Superstition in Jewish Belief. We're going to get all into dreams. What's the significance of dreams in Judaism? We're going to talk all about astrology. Fascinating, interesting stuff, lighter material, but very practical and relevant. And at the first class, those who come in person will be able to join us for some great sushi from Chicago. Please RSVP on the show's website. You can always check out the first class and see if you like it or not, if it's for you or not. All right, any questions, comments, thoughts on any material that we discussed today?
No, not really.
I'm hoping that it provides a little bit of food for thoughts as we reflect on all of our interactions with our kids, with our grandchildren, and we think about what we can do as parents to give our kids the best opportunity for success in life, and recognizing the role that Judaism played in our lives and that we hope it will have in their lives, because the amount that it contributes in a real powerful, concrete way is truly a priceless thing. Right, we have a few chats that came here. All right. Okay, thank you so much for joining us.
Marilyn and I are excited to be in the class.
Brad is.
Oh, good.
So,
Excellent. All right, so have a good night, everyone, and good Shabbos, and we'll see you soon.
we'll see you later.
Thank you.
Right.
Have a good Shabbos.
Have a good Shabbos. Bye-bye.